You see the photos, the untouched snow on the ridgelines, the glowing lodges, the boutique main streets strung with lights. You picture yourself by a stone fireplace in a mountain home that costs more than most people will earn in a lifetime. For a long time, that was the promise of the Colorado high country: escape, status, safety. But that promise is breaking. Right now, across Colorado's mountain towns, the numbers coming out of local realtor boards, rental platforms, and tax offices all point in the same direction. Listings are piling up, short-term rentals are empty, insurance quotes are exploding, and buyers, the lifeblood of this fantasy, are quietly disappearing. This is not a gentle cooling. This is not just a few price cuts on trophy homes. In town after town, we're seeing the early stages of a real estate breakdown that could reshape entire communities. Teachers, nurses, resort workers cannot afford to live where they work. Investors cannot make the math work, and in some zip codes, properties are sitting for months with no serious offers at all. If you are new here, this is Discover the Nation. We do not repeat the everything is fine script. We go underneath it. If you want real investigations into what is actually happening in America's housing markets, make sure you subscribe right now so you do not show up to a crash after it already happened. Today, we are taking you on a road trip through the Colorado mountains, counting down 10 towns where the dream is cracking the hardest. Stay to the end, because the number one town on this list is the one almost everyone still believes is immune. Let's start the drive.
Number 10. Pagosa Springs. We begin in the south, near the New Mexico border, rolling into Pagosa Springs. On the surface, nothing looks wrong. The hot springs still steam, the river still cuts through town, the mountains still frame every angle like a postcard. But behind that postcard, the housing market has gone silent. During the pandemic, Pagosa Springs became a classic short-term rental play. Investors swooped in from Texas, California, and the East Coast, buying cabins and chalets and turning almost everything into a vacation listing. Locals watched prices explode far beyond what local wages could support. For a while, it worked. Bookings were full, nightly rates soared, and people bragged about never needing a long-term tenant again. Then, the math snapped. Facing a housing shortage and growing anger from year-round residents, local officials did what hundreds of similar towns are now doing. They slammed the brakes. Moratoriums on new short-term rentals, caps on licenses, stricter enforcement. Overnight, properties that were purchased purely for Airbnb income suddenly became far less profitable. Look at the listing pages. High-end homes that would have been off the market in a weekend are now lingering for months. Days on market more than doubled compared to the boom. Local realtor reports show luxury inventory up dramatically year over year. Price cuts are no longer a shock, they are part of the playbook. The deeper problem is the gap. Median local incomes in the county can reasonably support something in the mid-300,000 range. Median asking prices, even after reductions, hover far above that. Investors are gone, locals are locked out, and that leaves almost no one left to buy. You end up with a market full of pretty homes and no viable buyers. That is not a soft landing. That is the beginning of a structural reset. If you are watching from a tourist town that went heavy into short-term rentals, ask yourself, is Pagosa Springs your future? And do not forget to subscribe to Discover the Nation, because we are not done with this pattern yet.
Number 9. Durango. From Pagosa, we head west on the highway to Durango, a rail town turned outdoor hub that always felt more real than a pure resort. College students, year-round residents, a functioning main street. It was supposed to be safer. That is what makes what is happening here so unsettling. Durango's problem is not just prices, it is movement, or the lack of it. Local realtor associations report that total transaction volume has fallen off a cliff compared to just a couple of years ago. Fewer homes are selling at almost every price point. Not because no one wants to live here, but because the walls have closed in on both sides.
On one side are owners locked into ultra-low mortgage rates. They will not list unless they have to, because trading a 2.5% payment for something above 6 feels impossible. On the other side are buyers staring at those higher rates and already stretched prices. They want to move, but the monthly payment turns that want into a no. The only ones who cannot wait are builders. Projects started when money was cheap and demand felt infinite are now hitting the market into a completely different environment. New townhomes and condos in and around Durango sit with no pre-sales, despite aggressive incentives, closing credits, and advertised rate buydowns. Those are quiet price cuts, and they're appearing more often. At the same time, the local economy is flashing warning signs. Population growth has stalled. Younger residents are drifting toward cheaper states. Landlords are pushing rents far beyond what local incomes can sustain, and yet vacancy is starting to creep up because tenants are doubling up or leaving entirely. Durango shows you what happens when affordability hits a wall in a town that actually has jobs. It's not a dramatic wave of foreclosures. It's something scarier, a frozen market, shrinking opportunity in a community watching its future quietly walk away. Is that better or worse than a crash you can see on a graph? Let us know in the comments. Number 8. Silverthorne. Now we head up the main corridor towards Silverthorne, the place you pass on the way to Keystone, Dillon, and Breckenridge. For years, it was marketed as the affordable alternative to the big-name resorts. Today, it is one of the clearest examples of what overbuilding looks like in real time. Drive through town and you will notice something. Projects everywhere. Half-finished townhome clusters, new condo buildings with glossy signs and empty parking lots. Developers spent the pandemic years racing to deliver more units into a market that seemed bottomless. They borrowed at low rates, pre-sold to investors and second home buyers, and assumed the party would never stop. Then, rates jumped. Short-term rental rules tightened, and demand fell away. Recent local data shows new construction inventory in and around Silverthorne has surged compared to pre-boom levels. Days on market have stretched far beyond what the local resale market is used to. Price reductions in big round chunks are common. In some complexes, nearly every listing shows at least one cut since it first hit the market. Short-term rental restrictions added fuel to the fire. Investor buyers, who once counted on nightly bookings to offset big mortgages and HOA fees, are running into regulatory caps and weaker tourism revenue. Analytics firms that track bookings report that forward demand in restricted areas has dropped sharply from peak. When that projected income disappears, so does investor enthusiasm. The bottom line is harsh. Local wages can only justify a fraction of current asking prices. Investors no longer see reliable cash flow or appreciation. That leaves an entire wave of new units chasing a tiny pool of qualified and willing buyers. Silverthorne is not just having a rough season, it is a case study in what happens when you stack cheap money, aggressive developers, and a sudden policy shift on top of each other. For any town thinking of approving thousands of new luxury units without a plan for who will actually live in them, this is the picture you should be studying.
Number 7. Crested Butte. We leave the interstate and wind our way to one of the most isolated, most beloved towns in the Rockies, Crested Butte. This is not just another resort. It has long been sold as the authentic alternative to the corporate mega-mountains. That image attracted a very specific kind of buyer, extremely wealthy, extremely image-conscious, and convinced they were buying into something pure. For years, those buyers pushed prices into the stratosphere. Median home values sailed past the $2 million mark. Sales over $3 and $4 million became normal. It was a niche market, but a relentless one. Now that niche is cracking. Recent sales reports from the Valley show total dollar volume in the high end has dropped dramatically from the peak. The number of ultra-luxury transactions has collapsed. It is not that sellers will not list, it is that qualified buyers at those prices are harder to find than ever. Look at the listing timelines. Homes that would once be whispered about and snapped up in a private deal now sit online season after season. Days on market have stretched into the hundreds for a significant slice of the inventory. Price cuts, once rare in this area, are now baked into the life cycle of a listing. Layer in the carrying costs. Remote mountain setting means expensive utilities, challenging maintenance, and some of the harshest insurance quotes in the region. When you see annual premiums on a single property that rival a full salary in most states, the pool of people willing to shoulder that burden shrinks fast. Add political friction over short-term rentals, limits on new permits, and a local workforce that cannot live anywhere near the base area, and you get a town caught between two identities. Is it a real community or a curated playground? Right now, the answer is leaning harder toward the second, and the real estate market is trying to adjust to that reality. If you are still with us, make sure you are subscribed to Discover the Nation. This is not just about one valley. This pattern is echoing across the entire high country, and we are only getting started.
Number 6. Steamboat Springs. Farther north, we roll into Steamboat Springs, a place that has always tried to balance small-town ranch culture with big-time ski branding. For a while, it worked. Families moved in, businesses grew, prices climbed, but people felt like they were getting something real in return. The last few years broke that balance. Between 2019 and the peak of the boom, home values in Steamboat took off, but wages did not follow. Essential workers who built this community were suddenly competing with out-of-town cash buyers and investors who saw every condo as a future short-term rental. Now the consequences are visible everywhere. School enrollment is down, local hospitals and service businesses publicly report chronic staffing shortages. Restaurant owners talk openly about cutting hours, not because they lack customers, but because they cannot house employees anywhere near town. On the housing side, the market is split. At the top, multi-million-dollar properties sit longer than they have in years, waiting for a buyer pool that is no longer infinite. At the lower end, older condos and townhomes, weighed down by rising HOA fees and new tax burdens on short-term rentals, are seeing meaningful price drops from their pandemic highs. New policies aimed at reining in short-term rentals have cut into the projected income investors use to justify paying peak prices. At the same time, higher mortgage rates swallow a bigger share of local incomes. The result is a shrinking middle class and a sales market with serious holes. Steamboat calls itself Ski Town USA. Increasingly, it is feeling like Investor Town on the weekends and Empty Town during the week. That is not sustainable, and the real estate numbers are starting to reflect just how fragile the model has become.
Number 5. Breckenridge. Now we swing back into Summit County to one of the giants, Breckenridge. Charming Main Street, bright lights, ski town music drifting out of doorways, a resort brand recognized around the world. For years, Breckenridge rode a simple formula: pack the town with tourists, turn as many homes as possible into short-term rentals, let values climb, repeat. Owners bragged that every condo could be a cash machine, every cabin a retirement plan. That formula has finally hit its limit. Facing a local housing crisis, gridlocked roads, and a community that felt squeezed out of its own town, leaders pushed through some of the strictest rental rules in the Rockies. Caps on how many homes can be rented nightly, license zones, higher fees, deeper enforcement. In a single season, a huge chunk of investor math stopped working. Realtor reports now show active listings in and around Breckenridge noticeably higher than just a few years ago. Many of those properties share the same story. They were bought at peak prices, furnished for visitors, and modeled on best-case booking calendars. With tighter rules and softer demand, those projections broke. Days on market are stretching longer. Price reductions are becoming simply part of the selling process instead of a last resort. Walk down Main Street in the shoulder months and you see the other side. Vacant windows where souvenir shops and cafes used to cycle through crowded seasons. Servers and store owners talk about guests who still come for the day, but spend less, stay shorter, and often leave without booking the next trip. A town that once felt sold out for the foreseeable future now feels, in places, like it is exhaling too hard. It is not that Breckenridge has no buyers, it is that the buyers left are different. They are more analytical, more cautious, less willing to ignore risk.
They ask hard questions about future regulation, about tax changes, about whether tourism itself has peaked. The old belief that any property with a roof and a mountain view would rise forever has been replaced by something Breckenridge has not had to deal with in a long time: doubt. For a place treated as a sure thing for decades, that psychological shift may matter more than any single price chart. Once confidence breaks, it does not come back quickly, and everyone in town, from investors to workers to longtime owners, can feel that change in the air.
Number 4, Telluride. We head southwest again into one of the most dramatic settings in the Rockies. Telluride, a box canyon that looks like a movie set, a lift that leaves right from town, and a reputation as one of the most exclusive ski destinations in the country. For years, Telluride seemed to float above the normal market cycle. It catered to wealth that was treated as immune to downturns. Private jets on the tarmac, town cars at the base, trophy homes that changed hands quietly in deals you never saw on public websites. Prices climbed because they always had, and because people believed this valley was too rare to fall. Even here, the spell is breaking. Recent reports from local real estate boards show a steep drop in the number of sales at the top end. Listings above $5 or $10 million are lingering month after month. Transactions that once wrapped up with almost no negotiation now require multiple cuts in creative terms. Agents quietly admit that some properties have been repositioned several times without success. At the same time, the cost of simply existing here has drifted into surreal territory. Groceries, basic services, childcare, everything has been inflated by years of unlimited money flowing in. The workers who keep lifts spinning, kitchens running, and hotels open are being pushed farther down the valley, sometimes commuting over snowy passes in the dark just to make a shift. That daily reality does not show up in glossy brochures, but it shapes the long-term future of the town. Insurance stacks more pressure on both sides, with wildfire risk rising and national carriers pulling back from the most exposed areas. Full coverage has become harder to secure and far more expensive. For some buyers, the financial risk of owning here is no longer worth the emotional reward. They look at the insurance quotes, the carrying costs, the remoteness, and decide to move their money elsewhere. Telluride will not turn into a ghost town. The scenery is too powerful, the brand too strong, but it can turn into something quieter and more brittle, a museum of wealth where the homes are occupied only a few weeks a year and actual sales become rare events. For owners who bought at the absolute peak, that shift is not just uncomfortable, it is dangerous. Because once the expectation of endless appreciation is gone, the floor under those prices suddenly looks a lot lower.
Number 3, Frisco. Drop back into Summit County, but ignore the glossy brochures and ski posters. Look at Frisco. Frisco has always been the connector, the service hub where real life happens between ski days. Workers sleep here before driving to Breck, Copper, or Keystone. If the resorts are the showroom, Frisco is the engine room. For years, the logic was simple. When Breckenridge got too insane and luxury bills devoured every neighborhood, people said, just move to Frisco. Then the pandemic boom hit, and that escape hatch slammed shut. Remote workers and second home buyers did not stop at the resort basis. They kept driving down Highway 9 and I-70, bidding on every condo, duplex, and older single-family home they could find. Buildings that once held full-time renters flipped to nightly rentals. Prices shot far beyond what a bar manager or a teacher could ever qualify for. The backup town finally ran out of backup. Now the stress is obvious. Help wanted signs sit in windows for months. Restaurants close extra days because there is no one left to staff them. Shops shorten hours, not for lack of customers, but for lack of employees who live nearby. Workers cram into shared bedrooms or live in aging RVs on the edge of town. Local officials quietly admit that service cutbacks, slower response times, and burnout are becoming the new normal. On the housing side, the market is fracturing.
Older townhomes that might once have gone to local families are stuck in limbo, too expensive for workers and not flashy enough for the next wave of high-end buyers. Newer high-priced units aimed at second homeowners sit longer, bundled with furniture, closing cost credits, and temporary cuts that keep getting extended. Frisco shows how a town can look packed on a Saturday and still be hollow on a Tuesday night. Lights blaze for weekends and holidays, then go dark again. When the workforce is burned out and whole buildings sit empty most of the year, the market can stay expensive, but it is no longer stable.
Number 2, Vail. Now we pull into the legend itself, Vail. For many people across the country and around the world, this is what Colorado looks like in their imagination. Pedestrian village streets, stone bridges, high-end boutiques, and slopes that lead almost directly to the door. For decades, owning here was treated as the closest thing you could find to a guaranteed win in mountain real estate. That era is over. Vail's problem is not a lack of appeal. The mountain is still the mountain. The issue is that the cost structure has finally outgrown even many of the buyers who used to anchor this market. Monthly association dues in prime buildings can easily match or exceed a full mortgage payment on a large home in another state. Add property taxes, club memberships, special assessments for new infrastructure, parking, and you start each year with a massive bill before you pay a single dollar of principal or interest. At the same time, the physical inventory is aging. Many condos and townhomes were built in the 1980s and 1990s. Buyers walking through see original layouts, dated finishes, and the looming reality of six-figure renovation work if they want the kind of experience they see in glossy photos. In a world where new luxury product is being built in Utah, Montana, Wyoming, and beyond, that comparison is not flattering. Transaction data from the local boards shows what happens when that gap opens up. The number of closed deals in the core village has fallen sharply compared to the boom years. For many property types, days on market have roughly tripled. Price reductions that would once have been whispered about quietly now appear in plain text on public history logs. Vail is not in flames, it is not empty, but it is drifting from unquestioned blue-chip status into something more uncertain and more fragile. For a town that built its identity on being the safest bet in the mountains, that is a profound shift. If you're getting value from this kind of deep dive, do not forget to subscribe to Discover the Nation. The patterns we are seeing in Vail do not stop at the town line, and the last stop on this list makes that clearer than anywhere else. Number 1. Aspen. We finish our journey in the Roaring Fork Valley, in a town that does not just attract wealth, it defines it. Aspen. For decades, Aspen was spoken about as a place where prices only traveled in one direction. The idea that values could meaningfully fall was brushed aside as something that might happen somewhere else, but not here. That belief allowed prices to drift further and further away from local incomes, construction costs, or any other standard measure. Aspen was treated as a different universe. Then the pandemic era arrived. Remote work exploded. Money was cheap. A fresh wave of ultra-high net worth buyers arrived, not just looking for a vacation spot, but for a sanctuary. Bidding wars broke out at levels that would seem absurd anywhere else. Entire streets turned into collections of investment properties and seasonal compounds. Now, the unwind has begun, and the numbers coming out of the valley are hard to ignore. Closed sales have dropped sharply from the peak. Inventory in the ultra-luxury range has swelled. Many listings now sit for most of a year, even after multiple reductions. A property that might have commanded $40 million is no longer guaranteed to land even close to that. 8-figure price cuts are no longer urban legend. They are the negotiation. At the same time, the town itself is straining under the cost of building an economy around part-time residents. Retailers and restaurants that once counted on a constant stream of high-spending visitors report thinner seasons, shorter trips, and more cautious wallets. Workers commute from farther and farther down valley or give up entirely and leave the region.
Census estimates suggest a huge share of homes are empty most of the year. Beautiful, but unused. Aspen is not physically crumbled. The streets still shine, the mountains still rise, the luxury boutiques are still open. But the town has lost something more fragile than any building: the illusion that it sits outside the rules of risk and return. When even Aspen has to cut prices, answer hard questions about insurance, in climate, and value, and wonder whether the next generation of wealth will choose a different mountain, you know the cycle has changed. And for anyone watching this from another so-called untouchable market, that change should feel less like a curiosity and more like a warning.
So what did our road trip through the Colorado mountains really show us? From Pagosa Springs and Durango to Silverthorne and Crested Butte, from Steamboat and Breckenridge to Telluride, Edwards, Vail, and Aspen, the details change, but the story rhymes. Cheap money pulled forward years of demand. Investors and second home buyers treated mountain homes like stocks on a screen. Local governments leaned on tourism and short-term rentals to paper over deeper structural problems. Meanwhile, workers who actually make these towns function were pushed further to the margins. Now, with interest rates higher, insurance more expensive, regulations tighter, and incomes not keeping up, the mountain fantasy is colliding with math, and math always wins. The Colorado mountain crash is not just a local story, it is a warning. If you see the same ingredients in your region, over-reliance on short-term rentals, extreme price-to-income ratios, hollowed-out communities, understand that what is happening here can happen there. If this deep dive from Discover the Nation helped you see the bigger picture, do 3 things for us. Like this video so more people see what is really going on. Subscribe so you do not miss the next investigation, whether it's another housing market, a tourism collapse, or a city nobody is talking about yet. And in the comments, tell us where you are seeing cracks in your own backyard, because this story is not over. Colorado may be the avalanche you can measure right now, but the next slope to give way might be a lot closer to home than you think.